Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight to our screening of Made You Look, A Story of Fake Art. Alec and I have been doing this series for 12 years, and we're really glad you came out to the Hayground School for this tonight. Usually, as you all know, we do this in person, but it's a different time. So we have a lot to dig into. So we're lucky to have the director of the film, Barry Avrich, with us tonight. Welcome, Barry. Thanks for doing this.
Absolute pleasure. Thrilled to be included.
Great. So we're going to get started. Alec, did you have any questions you want to start with, or should I just jump on my own?
Well, you go ahead, David. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, Barry, I know this is the second film that you've made that I've seen by you about modern art. Can you tell me what drew you to this story to get started in telling it?
Well, thank you, David. I did a film a couple of years ago called Blurred Lines that was on for Netflix that looked at the contemporary art world, a bit of a 101 on how the world worked. And it was so complicated to get access from everybody, from Amy Capilazzo, who had just sold her company, to Sotheby's and others. Nobody wants to talk about this world because it's unregulated, and nobody really wants to talk about the value and how prices are even developed and set for painting. So I thought I pretty much had enough of this world. And somebody had pointed me to the story in Vanity Fair, and I got introduced to Anne Friedman. And the more I dove into this story, I said this needed to be a film. It was casting out of Hollywood with all the characters all over the world, and the fact that people wanted to believe this was real, and who were the villains, who wasn't. I mean, lots of blame to go around in the story, but I was smitten with the story, and I knew that the only way to make it was to try to get Anne Friedman to talk, and which she really hadn't. She had said no to Anderson Cooper in 60 Minutes and whatnot. And so, I was able to get her to sit down, and that's where the film started to unfold for me. And we flew around the world, as you know, talking to everybody, and including Carlos Bergantinos in Lugo, Spain, which was a tough get. But that's how it began. I mean, I'm fascinated with the world. I'm a collector. But I just never imagined that this con could go on for 10 years, as long as it has, and have so many incredible people fall for it. I don't believe that Anne Friedman got into this caper, this scheme, with an intent to deceive. Do I believe that she should have known better? Absolutely. When it's one piece after another, Anne and her lawyer, Luke Nikas, will tell you, you have to put yourself in her shoes. It happened over so many years. I don't necessarily buy that. At the end of the day, being in the art world as you are, I think you have to be suspicious. She believed that she had found the tomb of Tutankhamun here, and that this was going to be a massive discovery. And at the end of the day, one would think that you start to get suspicious when it's one painting after another coming from one source. So again, as I've said, I believe there's lots of blame to go around, from the art consultants to the collectors themselves to the experts, and certainly Michael Hammer in a major way, who's suddenly seeing a faltering gallery, seeing, boatloads of cash come in, and this massive discovery from one source. So I just think Anne basically turned a blind eye, for the lack of a better phrase, and just kept going.
Yeah. And
paid the price, I think, at the end of the day.
And I'm wondering if Barry has an answer to that, as to what he thinks. Why does he think, assuming that Anne isn't guilty of being part of the fraud, why do you think she fell for Rosales?
Super great question. And the Thomas Hoving quote, which we have in the film, is staggering anytime anybody sees the film. And I've been in galleries all over the world, or museums, where they don't even bring up certain paintings from their archives, from their basement, because they're concerned that they might be fake. I did ask Anne Friedman those questions, and Glafira Rosales, who likes to come across as an abused woman under the thumb of her partner, Carlos Bergantinos, the father of their child, is not that. I mean, she was clever enough that she attended other auctions. She would buy art from Anne Friedman and became a customer. And really, I saw many letters of correspondence, Alec, between the two of them, where she really managed, as a great con artist, to bring Anne into her fold and talk about art And you see later on in the case when Rome is burning, Anne is almost pleading with her in letters that saying, I want to believe you, I want to believe you. I think this was a time for Anne Friedman that the gallery was in huge financial trouble. Gagosian, White Cube, Hauser, and Wirth had far surpassed major galleries all over the world. It surpassed Knoedler in not being important any longer. And she just wanted to believe that they were real. It doesn't completely answer the question as to why was Glaphyra so successful in conning Anne, assuming she wasn't involved in the fraud, as you say. But Anne, every time she looked at something, she'd go to these alleged experts. And Anne is charmed by stories. And Anne will tell you that paintings are discovered in people's attics all the time and in garage sales. And she believes in that, those fairy tales and mythology, in some cases reality on that end of it. Glaphyra Rosales is a mild-mannered, quiet, non-aggressive, unlike Carlos, her partner. And she was able to seduce Anne with these insane stories. And Anne believed there's tons of precedent over thousands of years of art where there's been these insane discoveries. It's hard to believe, again, for me, that so many different artists were available to Anne. This collection just kept growing and growing. It wasn't just a massive collection of Rothkos or Pollocks. It was 7 different artists. Amazing on that end of it. So it is bizarre to me that she was able to seduce her, given Anne's pedigree. But it was a perfect storm. Perfect storm.
What I found curious was that everyone wanted to change the subject, and I mean everyone. I mean friends of mine that were artists. I contacted friends of mine that were artists to query them about that world and that business and fakes and how people deal with that. And I mean, I just was so disbelieving about what I was going through and what I had concluded who was responsible for what. And I asked some very, very, very prominent artists, some very famous artists, and very famous people in the art world. And all of them wanted to change the subject as fast as they could. They don't want to talk about fraud. They know that fraud is a necessary evil. It's just there. There's nothing that could be done about it. And I was, I'm not going to say appalled, but I was definitely taken aback by how much no one would go down that path with me and talk about the severity of the issue of art fraud in that world today.
They don't even want to talk about prices. If you talk to artists about the value of their art and prices that they're getting and realizing it, nobody wants to talk. It's a Pandora's box. If you suddenly open it up, then the entire industry becomes decimated. It's insane about value of art, what people are getting for pieces. It's insane, but it'll never be regulated.
Why do you think they decided to settle instead of it going further with Anne Friedman's testimony?
It's an interesting question. So why did Desolé settle? I mean, Luke, Anne Friedman's lawyer, will tell you that they spent a fortune on mock trials and that it kept going one way or the other on that end of it. Anne says in the film she believed she would have won and that they didn't want her testimony. I'm not a lawyer. I can't comment on that end of it. But, Domenico wanted to get as much money back as he can. And I think probably his lawyers, Emily Reisbaum and her partner, basically said, I think this is going to be as good as it gets. It was a big number. I mean, he sued for an astronomical number based on what he paid. Astronomical number on that end of it, damages and whatnot, and got his money back. And so, I think that was it. How long did he keep going on that? And do I believe that Domenico felt that the trial wasn't going his way? Probably not.
You'd think that Anne's, the only one thing about Anne's modus operandi that I find odd is that they didn't bring in the most exalted experts to save them the trouble. I mean, once you find out the painting is fake, and once you find out that there were multiple fakes that were pulled off in the whole Knoedler episode, this destroyed this gallery. The gallery closed. I think they had been open for 165 years or something.
Yeah.
And they're gone. They weren't handed a traffic ticket, or they weren't handed some fine, or they didn't get dirtied up in the press, and then everything moved on. They went out of business. And I thought to myself, isn't there anybody that wants to call in people who are experts, who are the experts? I mean, there were people she consulted.
A lot of the foundations that represent these artists' estates have stopped offering opinions and validating art because they're getting sued and making mistakes. So the Paula Krasner Foundation will not authenticate art anymore. The Motherwell Foundation, Jack Flam, who runs it, Daedalus Foundation that represents Robert Motherwell, won't do it anymore. And primarily because he made a mistake on one of these fake Motherwells and got sued himself. So who are you going to call? I mean, nobody's prepared to put their neck out with these fakes because they get sued. And I want to ask you, Alec, before you go on that end of it, what did you, as you watched, we've talked about this a little bit before, as you watched Anne Friedman on camera, perhaps giving her longest interpretation of the episode for her, what did you make of her? I mean, she's a very...
Well, I think that Anne Friedman, we finished, she's a very what?
Comes across as very calculated, non-emotional on that end of it.
Well, to me, she comes across as someone who is a deeply wounded figure, whether she is responsible for those wounds herself. She is a woman who, no matter how you slice it, the incontrovertible fact is that she took the Knoedler Gallery and crashed it into an iceberg like the Titanic and sank the whole ship. She completely destroyed, through her judgment or lack thereof, she ruined what was among the most, if not the most prestigious art gallery in New York City. And she completely sunk the ship. She's like the captain of the Titanic that did that. And she has to live with that for the rest of her life, whether she was guilty of fraud. And I think that part of her is what irks her the most. I think she has completely set aside the idea. To her, it goes without saying that she's not guilty of fraud. She wants everyone to know that she is clean. She's not guilty of fraud. I think the one thing she cannot sidestep, which eats at her constantly, and you do get, I mean, what I said to you when we spoke, and what I said to Luke, who I've had other dealings with about Robert Indiana's estate and so forth, I said to Luke, I said, she seems like a sulking little girl in your movie. She sits there pouting and really feeling sorry for herself, and she's the victim. And her mood, her whole essence is that of someone who's the victim and how wronged she's been. And I want to go, well, maybe you're not guilty of everything that's been, you've been charged with or that's been suggested. Maybe your story is more complex than all this. But one thing remains, you sunk the Knoedler Gallery. You sunk it with your own hands, your own eyes and ears, and so forth. And there's no getting around that. And that's why I always say, where are the authorities that can come there and go, I mean, whether they render a judgment or not, what they're going to say to you is, I wouldn't buy that if I were you. I wouldn't do that if I were. There's no telling that that's really the right.
No one said that.
When I see Anne, I see someone who she feels like in whatever number of years she has left, and she is an older woman, will she ever be able to undo the damage to her reputation that's been done? And it's unlikely. And that's painful. That's painful. That's like Anthony Weiner or Kevin Spacey or someone who's like at a certain plateau, and you go right off of a cliff and go smashing down onto the rocks below. Are you ever going to be able to put your life back together? And I think Anne is just, it's just occurring to her that she may not have willfully passed fake paintings, but she did exercise some pretty horrible judgment. And what is her job but to render such judgments? What is her job other than to say, this is really a Pollock? I'm going to sell, it's going to cost you a lot of money. It's going to cost you, 8 figures, but this is really a Pollock. And she didn't do that. She didn't pull that off.
And you're right that everyone, every participant, the cast of characters, from the consultant to the experts to the other galleries, everybody's making money through this entire transaction on this. So that there's of no benefit to anybody to question any of this. No.
Well, the one thing I am mildly appalled about, and I am appalled about it, is that Rosales did no prison time. I'm not a big fan of prison. I'm not somebody who's saying throw them away and put them in prison. When I went through this whole thing with Mary Boone, I didn't want Mary Boone to go to prison for tax evasion or otherwise. I'm of the belief that that's a waste of taxpayers' money. You make Mary Boone teach art appreciation at CUNY for 10 years. That should be her sentence, is some kind of, significant community service. But the fact that Rosales went unpunished, because she is incontrovertibly, she's the villainess here. She is the villainess.
Along
paintings.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. Bergantinos and Rosales, they are the villains here. They are guilty of art fraud. They sold paintings in the tens of millions of dollars that were fakes. They knew exactly what there's no getting around that. There's no debate about that. And she didn't wind up doing any time at all in prison.
Very little.
I'm sure.
Insane. But I do believe, Alec, that the art world has also been not only destroyed by it not being regulated, but by art consultants who are teaching very wealthy people with too much money how to buy with their ears and not their eyes.
Right. Well, the other thing I think about is, and this is the last thing I'll say because I got to run, but the other thing I think about that I find interesting is where would Rosales be now if she hadn't been caught? Again, in that world of alternatives, if Rosales hadn't been caught, if Lagrange hadn't been divorced, or if Lagrange got divorced and hadn't been compelled to sell the painting, if the fraud had not been exposed that way, and Anne was still in power and Knoedler was still active, and would Rosales, was her goal to become one of these, an eminence in the art world, to become a really serious, heavy-duty player in the art world, and just passing off more and more of Kwan's paintings, Demon Corn, Fischl, you name it.
If you look at the history of Glafira and Carlos, they're grifters. They would go on to the next con, the next con, the next con. It's what they just kept doing. I mean,
I'm just going to wrap us up and say, Barry, thanks so much for taking the time out to do this with us and letting us share your film. I think it really struck a chord here, and we're really glad you did this. So,
pleasure. I love your audience, and I love the festival, so it's an honor for me.
All right, great. Well, we hope you can come back sometime. Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for coming and checking this out, and look forward to doing this again in the future. So thanks everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alec.
Thanks.
Talk to you guys later. Ciao. Thank you.